I'll never forget the exact moment when I realized the neighborhood tension had spiraled far beyond anything normal. What began as a small misunderstanding quickly turned into something much bigger. I was walking down my quiet street that morning, casually scrolling through messages on my iPhone, completely absorbed when it happened, a sudden, sharp tug on my arm. Startled, I looked up, and there she was, Karen, the infamous neighbor everyone had warned me about. Her hand was halfway to my phone, her expression fierce with indignation. Behind her stood her daughter, a little girl no older than 10, clutching a toy in one hand and staring wide-eyed at her mother's outburst. Her eyes silently begged her mom to stop. Karen's face twisted with that mix of anger and entitlement only she could pull off. "Hand it over!" she barked, her tone slicing through the morning air. "My daughter needs it." For a split second I froze, caught between confusion and disbelief. What could she possibly mean? Does her daughter need my phone? I wanted to reason with her, to de-escalate before this turned ugly. But then instinct took over. This wasn't about a phone. This was about control, about seeing how far she could push me. I stepped back, careful not to provoke her, but firm enough to make my boundaries clear. "Karen," I said evenly, "you cannot just take my phone." "You're crossing a line!" Her eyes blazed with irritation. She muttered something under her breath about her daughter and then spun on her heel, storming away. For a moment, I thought that was the end of it. I was wrong. Only minutes later, I heard the faint wail of police sirens echoing down the street. My heart sank. Karen had actually called the cops, claiming I'd endangered her child by refusing to hand over my own iPhone. I felt that familiar rush of adrenaline. Not from fear, but from the certainty that I was about to turn this entire situation around. What Karen didn't know was that I wasn't just an ordinary neighbor. I had someone in my corner, someone powerful. The state attorney. I had already discussed prior neighborhood disputes with them and knew exactly what my legal rights were. So when the police car pulled up in front of my house, I slipped my phone into my pocket and greeted the officers with a calm, almost polite smile. And right there, I saw it. The beginning of the end for Karen's little performance. Her confidence started to falter the second the officers stepped out. That's when it hit me. People like Karen love to wield power, but they never realize who they're really dealing with. As the officers began their questioning, her plan unraveled faster than she could react. What happened next shocked even her, and all because of one small detail she hadn't considered. When the officers approached, I leaned casually against my front porch rail while Karen gestured wildly in the driveway, her voice rising with frantic energy. "He refused to give my daughter the phone." "He's dangerous," she shouted, her tone cracking from overacting. Her hands trembled just enough to betray the truth. The officers kept professional composure, asking us both to explain our sides. Karen went first, spinning a dramatic tale, me as some unstable neighbor who frightened her daughter, completely twisting the facts to fit her fantasy. The cops listened carefully, jotting down notes without giving away much. I waited quietly, letting her dig herself deeper. Then, when it was my turn, I spoke clearly, steadily, and without embellishment. "She reached for my phone," I explained. "I didn't touch her. I didn't threaten her. I certainly didn't endanger anyone. Her accusation is false. I handed one officer my phone for inspection. Nothing out of place." Then, almost as an afterthought, I mentioned that I had already consulted with the state attorney regarding similar disputes in the neighborhood. The effect was immediate. Karen froze mid-sentence. Her posture stiffened, her confidence visibly cracking. She glanced toward the officer for reassurance, but he gave her none. It was clear to everyone there. I had both credibility and authority behind me. She hadn't expected that. She thought she could twist the story her way, but now the cracks were showing. The officer pressed her for clarification, and her explanations started falling apart. Each word she spoke made her sound less convincing, more desperate. The neighborhood had gone still. Curtains twitched. Everyone was watching silently to see who would come out on top. And then I saw it, the realization flash across Karen's face. Her attempt to intimidate me had backfired completely. One of the officers turned to her, his tone polite but firm, reminding her that filing false accusations could lead to serious consequences. Her lips tightened, but she said nothing more. I stayed calm, letting the officers handle it, knowing this wasn't over, but I wouldn't need to lift a finger. The next step would come from higher up. The state attorney's office would make sure of that. As the police cars pulled away and silence settled back over the street, the whole scene felt surreal. The tension that had hung in the air moments ago melted into uneasy quiet. Karen had wanted to teach me a lesson, but by the end of that day, it was clear she'd just written her own downfall. Karen stormed back into her house, her daughter following close behind, tugging gently at her mother's sleeve as if hoping to undo the chaos that had just unfolded. I stayed where I was, standing quietly on my porch, iPhone in hand, feeling that strange combination of relief and anticipation. Something told me this wasn't over. Karen had made a serious mistake. She'd underestimated me, and more importantly, she'd underestimated how involved the state attorney already was. The moment the police report was filed, calls had gone out. I detailed the entire situation to the state attorney's office, providing screenshots of text exchanges and even a short video clip clearly showing Karen reaching for my phone. Their response came swiftly and decisively. I was told I had done everything within my rights, that Karen's false report could very well carry legal repercussions. When I explained that she had involved law enforcement without cause, I could almost hear the tone on the other end of the line shift. Part professional, part amused disbelief. "You have the right to pursue this further if you choose," the attorney said. That one phrase, "pursue this further," lit a spark inside me. It meant accountability. And if I decided to take that path, Karen's actions would have consequences far beyond an afternoon of neighborhood theatrics. The following day, I received a call from the local police precinct. They were conducting a follow-up on the incident. Calmly, I walked them through everything again, each step, each word, emphasizing that I had followed the law to the letter. I also mentioned, casually but clearly, that the state attorney had been briefed on the situation. That changed everything. Karen's elaborate story, once so dramatic and self-assured, started to collapse under scrutiny. The inconsistencies the officers had sensed before were now backed by hard evidence. My screenshots, my video, each piece dismantled her version of events. When I hung up, I felt a quiet satisfaction settling deep in my chest. Not from revenge, but from resolution. Karen's illusion of control was gone. Her attempts to manipulate the system had failed spectacularly, and now the system itself was watching her. That evening, as I walked past her yard, I saw her standing by the window. Her face was tight with disbelief and frustration. I simply smiled and kept walking, my phone safe in my pocket. The balance in the neighborhood had shifted. Subtly, but undeniably, Karen, the self-proclaimed enforcer of the block, was suddenly the one on edge, second-guessing every move. And me? I finally understood the quiet power of being informed, patient, and prepared. The next few days carried a strange calm. Karen kept to herself, no longer striding down the street with that air of superiority she once wore like armor. Even her daughter seemed hesitant now, lingering near the yard's edge, but never crossing that invisible boundary again. Word spread, not in whispers of gossip, but in quiet acknowledgement. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now offered friendly nods and small smiles. It wasn't just about what had happened, it was about how it happened. They saw that I hadn't lost my temper. I hadn't retaliated. I'd stayed calm, used the law, and let the truth do the talking. Meanwhile, Karen faded into the background, a quieter, warier version of herself. I'd see her glance around before speaking, careful now in every word and gesture. The change wasn't out of fear, it was awareness. She had learned what accountability feels like, and in a way that was justice. Not loud or dramatic, just steady, undeniable, and fair. The final turning point came when the state attorney followed up one last time. They confirmed that Karen's false report had been officially documented. No criminal charges were being pressed yet, but the record was permanent. If she ever tried a stunt like that again, if she weaponized another false claim, the penalties would be far more severe. It was a quiet kind of victory. No shouting, no confrontation, just order restored through truth and evidence. Watching Karen move through the neighborhood after that was surreal. She was no longer the loud presence everyone avoided. She had become cautious, deliberate, like someone who'd finally realized the world doesn't bend to their will. People like Karen make one fatal mistake. They confuse intimidation for strength. But real strength isn't loud. It's composed, informed, and unshakable. I had all three, and that made every difference. Looking back, I realized this was bigger than one neighborhood feud. It was about the importance of knowing your rights, of standing firm when you're tested, and of trusting that calm confidence carries more weight than chaos ever could. Authority doesn't come from yelling or threatening. It comes from knowledge and composure. Karen had tried to take what wasn't hers, but in the end, it was the very tools she dismissed, law, evidence, and patience, that turned everything against her. By the time the dust settled, the neighborhood had returned to its peaceful rhythm. Karen had learned her lesson, and I walked a little taller, knowing that standing firm had rewritten the entire narrative. This story didn't end with shouting or revenge. It ended with quiet justice, the kind that doesn't need to make noise to be heard. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to hit that subscribe button so you don't miss any of our neighborhood sagas. Drop a comment below. What would you have done in my place? And don't forget to like the video if you love watching Karen chaos unfold.